Hi everyone, my name is Dan Sewin, the Director of Education for CAPA, and I'd like to welcome you to an editing video on a trip that I made to Elbow Falls last March with Tracy Elliott. Tracy Elliott is part of the education team, and we went on site and we wanted to do a in the field video of a location and different shooting techniques and what we walk through in our process, and we wanted to follow that up with an editing video. So I'm looking at my Lightroom catalog and I'm looking at the photos that I did take in the shoot, and there's a few that I really liked and wanted to explore with in the editing, and I wanted to take advantage of the deep water winter river crossing that we did. So I wanted to work on this image right here, which is a very different vantage point to the waterfall, and I had never been to the other side before. So this is the photo that I wanted to work on in this presentation. So I have my image full screen here, and I want to just talk a little bit about the areas that I think are important and areas that I want to protect in the image. And one of the interesting areas of the image to me is this area here with the ice in front of the waterfall and the stream coming down, and I want to take advantage of the rocks and use this as kind of a framing for the image. We did this crossing, so I want to make sure that the rocks, some form of the rocks, are in the photo. So I want to include a bit of the rocky foreground. When I took the shot, I was standing quite far back and I had a 70 to 200 so that I could kind of compress the landscape. So to me, the areas that are important are the snow and ice, the water right here, the rocks through here, and the side pieces here. The background here is not too important, so what I'm going to do now is enable some lens correction to make sure that the file has any issues sorted out for chromatic aberration and the correct profile is set for the image. Once I have those two settings established, now I'm going to look at my crop for the image. And as I mentioned in the beginning, there's a few things that I wanted to accent. So it's probably going to be a 16:9 image. And what I want to do is I want to look at the bottom, and I want to try and make sure that where I'm cutting off the bottom makes sense and where I'm cutting off at the top makes sense. So I'm going to pan up here, and if I close this in a little bit on the side, I like the diagonal line that the snow is making coming into the waterfall. I like the rocks on this edge coming into the waterfall, and if I was to just close down the top a little bit, I can get rid of this little bit of a patch right there because it's not really helping, and it'll be a distraction at the end. Right about there looks good. Across this edge looks alright. The snow is coming in. We've got a bit of a leading line to the fall. The trees are okay. This bugs me a little bit here. Might see if I can play with the crop a little bit more to either totally remove that. That might be good. So I have my crop established. I think it has the information that I want to include, and what I'm going to look now is look at the basic panel, and I'm going to look at the exposure and try and sort out some issues with the exposure. So snow is quite challenging to shoot with it being bright white, and it is a little bit overexposed across the top of the bank here. So I'm going to just bring my exposure down just a little bit, and with that it's going to give me some of the detail back. My whites and highlights weren't blown out, so I'm going to make some adjustments there just to turn down the whites a little bit. With that adjustment, I'm going to look at, is there anything with the highlights that I can do to bring a bit more detail in? There's a little bit more detail there. The shadows, I'm going to open up the shadows slightly, because I'm watching this rock face here and this face here and just bringing back some detail there. The whites, I think I can just leave where they are. And the blacks, I'm going to just darken a little bit just to have some good contrast. And these are overall adjustments to the entire image. So right now I'm looking at the entire scene and making the adjustments that way. The vibrance, I'm going to just adjust the vibrance a little bit and just see what it does to the watercolor. The water, as it comes through the elbow falls, it's a really nice blue. So try and make sure that the image captures that color. And I'm going to look at the saturation and just adjust this, and it magnifies that blue and green a little bit, and I like what it's doing to the ice and the water. And right now I think the global adjustments, I'm pretty happy with this image. Looking across, the colors are natural, the rock is natural, the trees are natural, the bush is natural to this environment. And I'm going to, I think, give this image a check to make sure if there's any spots or center dust to look for. So using the spot healing tool, I'll just hit the button there for the eraser. I have the ability to visualize spots. So we'll see what happens when I hit this. There's quite a lot of information in the file. So if I bring the intensity down, it doesn't look like there's too many spots to deal with. If I bring it way up, it's just, there's just too much to see. If I uncheck visualize spots, I'm just going to look at these areas here and this area here just to see if that is anything actually important. It's just picking up the little rock faces there, so that's not, those aren't spots, and there isn't any spots there. I'm pretty fortunate with this image. Usually I have lots of sensor spots in my images that take quite a while to edit, so I'm pretty happy with this one. So we are pretty fortunate with Lightroom that you are doing non-destructive editing. So I'm looking at the overall image. Am I happy with this or not? Do I want to change the exposure a little bit? If I bring it down a little bit more, I think I might be getting a bit more detail in that snow. And what I can do is I can use radial masks and blurring. With non-destructive editing techniques, I can come back and I can change things to the image, and I still have my original raw file intact, so I'm not just damaging any pixels. So I'm going to bring down the exposure a little bit more to get the information of the whites that I want to see through here. These are non-destructive editing techniques, which is going to save my data, as I've mentioned. And I can use masking techniques to use a brush, linear gradients, and radial gradients to create pools of light and emphasize areas that I think are important. To me, the waterfall and the ice are the star of the show. Some of the information through here I can use a brush and radial filters to keep it dark and light in here, and I can improve some of the lightness in here, and I can also darken some of the foreground of the areas that I think are non-important through here. So the first mask I'm going to add is a radial gradient, and I want to add it to this area of the ice, and I'm going to position this, and this was an area that I thought was pretty important to me. So I'll position it right here. To the red is, I like to have the show overlay on to see where the mask is, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to increase the texture in this mask, and you can see the texture really getting defined inside that ice, and I'm going to increase some of the clarity, and that'll just develop some contrast with the edges and really show the shape of the ice in that area. I like what that looks like. That's my first mask. The next mask I'm going to add is a brushing mask, and with this I'm going to use a dodging mask, and I'm going to make it small, and I'm just going to highlight some of the white areas inside the waterfall. We had nice soft lighting inside here, and I'm just going to paint some white into these areas and just improve the tonality and the whites in the shapes of the waterfall and just accent those streams. I really liked what that was doing. Nice little accent in here. And with the density and the flow of that, I can increase the exposure a little bit. I used low flow, low densities, so I could keep painting and it would just get more intense as I keep painting. And with the here, I can check that and I can turn it on and off and see. Mask. The next brush I'm going to add is a brush mask. With this brush mask, I'm going to do some accenting inside the waterfall. And I'm just going to highlight areas of the stream. Paint in a little bit of exposure and just give this a bit of an accent through here. So I'm dodging, and the next mask I can do is a darkening, or I can also use the dehaze brush. And what the dehaze brush will do, it will darken. So some of these, so I've added some lightening and darkening, some darks to the darker areas to make those whites pop and create the shapes better. And it's just going to give a bit of texture within the waterfall and just give some interest and just give a bit more contrast. So I'm going to create another radial mask this time, and I'm going to fit it into this area here. This will be a bigger mask. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up some of the shadows. It's a little bit blocked up inside there. I'm not opening it too much. I do want to see a path of the light coming into the waterfall. I think this side looks pretty good. But I think it looks nice and natural there. Pretty happy with that. So the last mask I'm going to add is there's lots of ways you can do this. I'm going to add a radial gradient filter. I'm going to make it really large. And I'm going to center this on the wall. And then I'm going to invert this mask. And instead of using the vignette tool on the bottom, I'm going to just slowly play with the exposure a little bit and the contrast, just to make sure the focus is on the waterfall, and that's the star of the show. A little bit of whites. And using that large radial mask, I was able to get into more of the scene, and I had more control of the areas that were being affected. And so taking a mask and inverting it, the red is where that mask is being applied. So overall, I'm pretty happy with the editing that I've done on the image so far. I feel like I was able to get some nice detail on that ice, play with the colors, and as Tracy and I went out there, we both talked about how we both like black and white images. And so with the new Lightroom, we have a button to change this to be black and white here. So if I hit the button, I can see what the image now looks like as a monochrome image. And I really like what the snow is doing in the middle there. I think the lighting is a little bit flat across the scene looking at this black and white image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take advantage of the mask that I had just made as my vignette. So if I highlight this mask, I can right click on this and I can hit duplicate mask. That's actually going to make the vignette a little bit stronger along the bottom. And I think I like what that looks like because it keeps the star of the show nice and bright, and it's darkening the areas that I don't think are as important. I have enough shadow detail through the sides. I'm pretty happy with what that looks like. And since I've turned this image to be a black and white image, I've come down to the black and white panel and I'm going to look at some of the colors. There wasn't a lot of blue. Quite surprisingly, the only blue is through here. So if I adjust this, I don't see much change. I'm going to check the oranges. The oranges actually affects the rocks quite a lot. And if I adjust this, I'm brightening the orange tones in the rocks. This way I'm darkening. I like what that looks like. Pretty happy with how this image finished. And the last step would be looking at noise reduction. The noise in the image doesn't seem too high. I'm going to just give it a touch of noise anyways, just to make sure it's a clean image. My settings were ISO 100, so it should be good. And I'm going to look at sharpening in the image, and if I start adding some sharpening, it will affect the rocks. And I did add right now. I haven't added any sharpening to the image, so I'll just play with the sharpening here. Just some general sharpening. Then if I hold down the Alt key and then the masking, if I slide this, the farther I slide it to the right, the white areas are being sharpened and the black areas are not being sharpened. And I don't want the waterfall to be sharpened, like the rocks to be sharpened. Probably good here. See what this looks like. Yeah, pretty happy with that. So now I'll just minimize these. And when you have the history on the side here, you can come back and you can go right to the very beginning. And so this is where we started. And this is where we ended. There you go. It's pretty nice image of Elbow Falls with a different composition than it's normally seen from this location. Hopefully you learned some tips and tricks out of the edit, and it's quite simple to go through and use non-destructive techniques to create a nice image.